and welcome to our third What If session. I am Farron and I'm joined today by my colleague Viepia. As you would have noticed, today's session has been pre-recorded. That is due to load shedding, but hopefully we will be live again in 2 weeks for our fourth session. So today our topic is, what if your employee works from home? Is your duty to provide a safe workplace extended to a home office? Viepia will be taking us through this discussion and I'll be asking questions in between. Viepia?
Thank you, Farron. To kick off our discussion, I think we need to look at the provisions of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. We know that the Occupational Health and Safety Act places an obligation on all employers to provide as well as maintain, as far as it is reasonably practicable, a working environment that is safe as well as without any risk to the health of its employees. The question now is, this obligation that we know is at your physical workplace, your office, the factory, etc., is that now extended to, for example, an employee working from home and that designated area where this employee is working from? And important to answer this question is to look at what is the definition of workplace in terms of the OSH Act. So the OSH Act defines the workplace as any premises or place where a person performs work in the course of his or her employment. And importantly, the definition also extends an employer's duties to anywhere its employees perform their work. So what does this mean? It means that the definition of workplace is extended to employees working from home, and accordingly the employers remain obliged to, as far as reasonably practicable, ensure that their employees are working under safe conditions, irrespective of where they are working from. Accordingly, employers are still under a duty to, as per normal, identify any hazards or any risks that might be present in an employee's remote working situation or that designated working area, and then also to determine how these risks can be mitigated or removed going forward.
And then tell us, how can employees identify hazards at an employee's home office?
I mean, that's the challenge. In your normal working environment, it's easy to identify hazards and risks in your normal workplace, but to identify risks and hazards in an employee's or a designated work area, remote working home office, the only way or the best way you can do that is by conducting inspections, physical inspections of the designated area or the workspace. It is, however, advised that this be done on reasonable notice. You don't necessarily just want to rock up at the employee's home and force yourself into doing an inspection. So that, and preferably it must be conducted by a health and safety representative.
Okay, and so you've taken us through some of the employer's obligations. Are there any obligations placed on the employee in this regard?
Yes, I think so. The employees are under a duty to cooperate with all the procedures that the employer has put in place, which relate to the health and safety of this designated workspace, and whilst the employees are working remotely. But over and above that, the employees also are obligated or placed under a duty to inform the employer should he or she be unable to comply with any of the measures that the employer is implementing or wants to implement in terms of health and safety, in terms of this designated workspace.
Okay, and how does the employer ensure that the employee's home office is safe?
Look, I think if you implement the following 5 or so measures, you would at least be compliant. The first point being the risk assessment. We know risk assessment. Everyone's been speaking about it over and over again in the regulations, in the directives, in terms of providing providing a safe workplace. So that does not change, Farron. I think you should still conduct the risk assessment. The second point is getting putting a safety checklist in place. I mean, that goes with my first point of the risk assessment. But before, or if the remote working arrangement has already started with the employee, to ensure a safe workplace, draft a safety checklist issue it to the employee simply answers yes or no, and that would put you in a better position as the employer to then determine what are the risks and then go forward how to mitigate and obviously control these risks. A third point in terms of how to ensure this office, the home office, is safe, is to provide relevant or create awareness, provide relevant instructions, and even if it's necessary, train employees on workplace safety, specifically in the working from home context.
Yeah.
An important instruction, I think the most important instruction in the safety context is that employee working from home should agree that he or she is not allowed to work from any other area or office other than the agreed to workspace that the parties have agreed to.
Yeah.
In other words, he's or she's not allowed to work at Vida or Wimpy or Muggenbean, whatever the case may be. The fourth point is the implementation of contractual changes or a policy, so a working from home policy, remote working policy, and there's various things that I believe you need to agree with the employee contractually, which I'll unpack in a minute, but it can relate to workplace safety, it can relate to working hours, it can relate to the employee's new role, it can relate to basically many things, but safety being a very important part of these contractual changes. And then finally, I think part of the creating of awareness, providing instructions and maybe training, is to make the employee aware of the hazards that you have identified as the employer, and then also to inform the employee what measures you plan or what measures you will be implementing to mitigate or perhaps remove these risks or hazards.
So, from a safety point of view, what are some of the contractual changes that you would recommend?
I think, again, as I said earlier, from a contractual point of view, you would want to agree to hours of work for obvious reasons. You want to agree to the employee's new role. But from a safety point of view, also company equipment, you want to agree to the safekeeping and all of those things. But from a safety point of view, upfront, you want that employee to tell you in writing, agree to it, that he or she has a designated safe workspace that is free from hazards, that is free from risks, etc. Yes, you'll be doing your risk assessment, but you want to have that agreement in place at least up front, right? The employee must agree in writing that he or she will only perform work from this designated area, and also that he or she will ensure to maintain a certain level of safety within this area. And then finally, that as we spoke about the inspection that we referred to earlier, the employee can, in writing or contractually, agree to these inspections, on condition that it is on reasonable notice, etc. So those are the three things. I think the most important one being that, as we said earlier, that the employee acknowledge and agrees that he or she will only perform work from the specific area that you have inspected, that you've conducted a risk assessment on, the checklist is in place, and all of that.
Okay, Vipya, you've referred to a safety checklist. What should this checklist contain?
I mean, generically, we can refer to a generic checklist. Ideally, you would want to adopt this checklist in accordance with that employee's specific workplace. But just a couple of ideas or pointers that can be on the checklist is, for example, floors are clear and free from hazards. When we talk about phone lines and electrical cords, that is stored away. It's not close to a heater or any open flames or flammable areas. What else? Your temperature, ventilation, lighting in the room are adequate. For example, walkways and doors are not obstructed. If there is stairs or a stairway that is more than, let's say, 4 stairs, that there are adequate handrails or protection in that regard. Maybe there's a heater mounted against the wall. Is that safe? Those are the things that one need to look at. Maybe a fire extinguishers. What about an evacuation plan? All of these things must be put in place. The employee turns off equipment when it's not in use, especially now with load shedding. Yeah, and we can also go into the employee's actual chair. Is it adjustable?
Yeah.
Does it comply with the certain standards that is required? The desk, is that at a required height? So these are just some of the pointers that one can include on a checklist.
Yeah.
If the viewers wants any further advice in this regard on a proper checklist, I mean, they can always consult us. But again, part of your risk assessment, I think this checklist would be ideal.
Yeah.
And it's a simple document that you hand out and the employee just answers yes or no.
Yeah.
If there's any no's in terms of do you have or is the top of your screen at eye level, you can address it in that regard.
Okay, Vipia, thank you
very
so much. Very interesting discussion, as I'm sure not a lot of employees would have thought that their home office would actually have to comply with these requirements.
Yeah.
But as Vipia said, if you require any further advice on how to draft remote work policies, if you need any advice on your contracts with your employees, or even on a safety checklist, please do give us a call or pop us an email. All of our details are on our Facebook page. If you have any questions that are relevant to this session, as always, you can pop us an inbox. We will try to answer any relevant questions. Other than that, enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you for our next session.
Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers.